To order the Public Works Committee meeting Thursday, May 25th, 2017. Call to order, please.
Roll call. Mr. Andrew?
Here.
Mr. Graham was unable to attend. He's attending his grandson. Well, his grandson is playing in a championship game this evening. Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mr. Farnham?
Here.
President Guidry?
President Gidry.
Mr. Guillory?
Here. Here. Sorry. Here. Here.
Mr. Guidry's here?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you. Mr. Landry?
Here.
Mr. Latour?
Here.
Dr. Mackey?
Present.
Ms. Mayo?
Here.
Vice Chairman McMillan?
Here.
Mr. Scott?
Here.
Mrs. Trimmer? Mr. White?
Here.
And Chairman Barris?
Here. Thank you. Item number 3, appearance by representatives of LaVille Uni regarding the Welcome to Westlake sign. Mr. McMillan?
Thank you. Mr. President, if you come down with me also, I'd like to take you with me. I'd like to call up City Councilman Skeeter Hayes, his wife Mimi, and Wanda Calderera to come up, and we're going to bring them up here. They're here tonight for to show appreciation to this jury and what we've done. Basically, y'all have known over a period of years, we've had the world's largest, or the largest sign in America, I would guess, as far as welcoming to Southwest Louisiana, welcoming to Westlake, and welcoming probably the biggest sign in the state, maybe the United States. But with funding from this jury and Phillips 66, this is going to be our new sign at our entrance to Welcome to Westlake right here. We're very thrilled to do this. I'm going to let Mimi Hayes, as I know her, come up and say a few words about what was the conception of this sign and how we got it to where we're at now. Mimi?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for allowing us to take just a portion of your time this evening. When Hal first called and asked me if I would mind doing this, of course I was delighted just to be able to express our sincere gratitude. It's a dream come true for us, I have to say. Just a little bit of history here. The idea for the sign originated with our son, Todd Hayes. He was a 47-year-old businessman in Westlake, grew up there, went to school there, and loved Westlake. In the early morning hours, he would get a crew off to work. Then he was a cyclist, so he would ride through Westlake making notes of things and of ways that he could improve and make the city better. And just on his own, he'd pick up trash and so forth and so on. One day he stopped by and he said, "Mom," he said, "I was at the railroad track," and he said, there was a long line of cars, vehicles that was waiting there. And he said, "I looked up," and he said, "I saw that huge sign, and there's been so many negative things through the 30-some plus years that sign has been there." And he thought to myself, he said, "What a beautiful scene that would make if there was a mural up there that would depict some of the wonderful and positive things about Westlake." He deposited that thought with me, and a few years shortly thereafter, he passed away from melanoma cancer in 2014. And thereafter, I began to share that idea with different people, and got such a positive response that it began to flourish. I prayed about it and got a call from the PR person from Phillips 66 inquiring as to what our plans were, that they had heard about our organization and had supported us in our various activities and fundraisers. So anyway, it sort of all stemmed from there, and we had a plan, we thought, in place. It didn't come to fruition, and so we got another plan, and in so doing, we went to Hal. Wanda and I did, with our request of needing additional funds. Ours wasn't quite adequate enough, and Hal took a look at it, heard our story, and said, "You know, I don't know if I can help, but I will try." And as you guys know, the rest is history. So from the bottom of our hearts, on behalf of LaVille Uni, thank you so much.
Good, thank you. LaVille Uni is a a committee that does a local festival. They're in their second year now. Ms. Wanda Calderera is the president of that. She'd like to tell you a little bit about that and what we have going now. Ms. Wanda?
Thank you very much.
Right here.
It all started, we realized we were the only little community without a festival around us. We had church festivals and organizational festivals, but not a town festival. And our town is really wonderful, and we want to bring the community together. So we came up with the name. Mimi researched it at some of the industry around, and we named it La Ville Unie, and that is the city united. And so we want to bring the city together. And you guys have helped us when it originated in 15. Some of you contributed some funds for that. Hal has been behind this all along. And we have a twofold mission. One is to bring the city together, to unite us, and it has been very successful. The town has been very supportive. Another one, like Mimi addressed, is the beautification of Westlake, because Westlake has a lot to offer the people, and we just want to make it better and better. And so with your help and with industry, we got it going. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank Hal, because I know you probably know Hal, but I saw him in a meeting. It was several of us talking to Houston, and I mean, he got it going, and he had a few more dollars more than Philip 66, so he took charge of that meeting, I thought. Thank you very much. Thank you again.
You know, let me just say one thing. This couldn't be done without the entire police jury voting on this. Thank you for supporting me in this effort. We did have some gaming funds, and we had some matching gaming funds, and it had to have jury action. So your yes vote was very much appreciated. Of course, I believe it's going to be a really great addition to Southwest Louisiana. Mr. Guidry?
Thank you, Hal. And just looking at the mural, I think it's outstanding, and I think that the way that you guys collaborate on putting the different sceneries together with industry, with transportation, and the one that I love most is sports. The Westlake Rams have got to be excited about what's going to be on this, and I think that that's going to give not only pride to the city of Westlake, but I think to the school itself. So, job well done.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, you want to say some words? You want to come say it?
No, I think they've said all of them.
With that being said, on behalf of us and Westlake in my hometown, thank you very much, jury. Thank you. Do we have somebody take a picture tonight? Where's our camera guy? Anyhow, let's, yeah, get a phone or something.
Hey, you want me to get it?
No, put that up.
Dennis, like,
I'm gonna record this.
I think we'd rather have a poll.
Got a piece of electrical tape on the back of it, thinking it's a camera.
Thank y'all again, guys. Couldn't have done it without you. Hey, big guy. Thank you so much.
Hey, that's theirs.
It was about to tap me.
I know.
Had to get some of our money back.
Yeah.
Politicians, we about to have to do it.
Yeah, man, just take them out.
I'll let you guys.
Coordinated thing. Junior sign.
Thank y'all, and we look forward to seeing that sign up there for real.
Y'all come back now.
Y'all come back.
No question.
Yeah.
Item 4, receive report from staff regarding an update on the parish-wide drainage study authorized by the police jury. Mr. Bean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight, just a couple of points before I hand it to Alan, who has a PowerPoint presentation. There's no action tonight required. We're not seeking any action by the committee It has simply been a while, and it's time to give a good update. A lot of progress on this initiative, and as we speak, we're still in a stakeholder input process through May 30th. We want to make sure everybody who would be affected by this has opportunity to give input. So we actually extended that to give them a little longer, and we'll go through a timeline at the end, but Alan's got a good set of slides to update everybody and certainly take any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead. I'll remind you that Tom's asked me to remind you that if, you know, some of the slides here are going to be a little hard to see at times with the size of the text, so if you want to see it on your tablet, that you need to press the star button and you can bring it up in front of you. Might be a little easier to see, but so kicking it off, this is like Brian described, is just an update, very timely, and I'm going to try and run through it. I got about 12 or 13 slides to just catch you up, and we'll get right into it. You've seen this slide before, but tonight we're going to focus on policies and ordinance. We're going to basically tell you where we're at in that process, give you just a brief update on the changes that are being offered. Then we're going to talk a little more tonight about the capital improvement program, which is always of interest, the projects that are working their way through the pipeline, to give you some understanding of where we're at on that and how that works. And that's going to basically be what we cover tonight. So progress to date on the ordinances primarily, although this slide focuses on that. So in October of 16, basically the jury approved the standards and voted on a set of guidelines, of design standards that we needed to utilize to develop the ordinances. We worked with the coalition throughout, you know, the months of December and all the way into really April of this year, going through various iterations of the ordinance draft, till we finally got to a product that we felt like was ready to present to stakeholders and try and move forward. So that has played itself out over this amount of time, and now in April was the first round of, or really the last round of meetings that we've had that invited stakeholders, that would be developers, builders, engineers, architects, those that are, you know, directly affected by any changes in the ordinance. We asked them to come forward to some meetings. We presented in detail to the engineering and architect community detailed ordinance updates. We gave them copies of everything, and we have now are in that response period time. Same thing with the development and building community, although that was a little bit more of a generic presentation to preserve some of their time, but we had good question and answers, and we provided them with the same thing. So at this point, they are under review by the stakeholder groups, and we're waiting on comments to come in. To give you a little bit more detail of what's in that, of course, all the ordinance changes are captured in Chapter 26 of the Zoning and Development Code. So everything's in there that gets changed. That chapter is made up of 10 articles. The articles that are highlighted in red are those that we had to actually change to facilitate the new drainage ordinance proposals. So without going into much detail on those, you know, basically that's a 200-page document, that chapter, and there's probably 40 pages in that chapter that actually got changes. So that's kind of what it really boils down to. To give you some key changes, some highlights and changes, preliminary plans being required. That's a key change, and we feel like in the overall process, in that a lot of the projects that run into hurdles is because we didn't get off the ground in the right fashion. You know, and so what we're calling for in a conceptual plan manner is to meet at the very beginning of a project for all the people who are going to be reviewing and helping that project through the system to come together and sort of try and expose the hurdles that'll come to that project as they go through the process, so that they know what they're dealing with and they have an opportunity to plan and minimize the time that it takes to get through the process.
Second thing is what we're calling the required runoff management plan. That is a name change. You may have heard me say that from a drainage impact analysis. We're asking new development to come with a plan that handles their runoff and their field that they're going to be placing on their sites, handles it such that that site is ultimately built in a neutral fashion to the rest of the system, so that there's basically a no net impact, and that development is allowed to go on through and be constructed. Next change, something new, is the drainage impact fee. In all of the ordinance, you're trying to decide who should do their on-site mitigation, who should do it on-site, and who shouldn't. And in reality, there is a practical line somewhere that some sites are just too small to put detention ponds on and to do a lot of mitigation. So you have to have another mechanism for them to be mitigated in another fashion other than on-site. The impact fee provides for a way to do that. It's what other communities often go to. And what it allows you to do is to allow them to pay a fee in lieu of doing it on-site. That fee is then used and put toward overall drainage system projects to help improve drainage in their areas or where it's needed. So it's a way of contributing to the effort to reduce drainage or to minimize your impact on the system. Right now, that threshold is set at 2 acres and something that's still under discussion. Detention and field mitigation standards are things you've heard of before in this process. Basically, those are the main standards that we're upping, we're increasing. So detention pond standards are there now, but we're raising it from a 10-year design to a 25-year design. Some of the field mitigation standards, which is accounting for the amount of dirt that you're going to bring onto your site, some of those are there now, but there's a ton of exemptions in the ordinance, so it basically allows you to put as much fill as you'd like on a site. So those are two things in detail that are, the standards are significantly changed to try and make your site a little more neutral as you go through developing it. Lateral right-of-ways and requirements. When sites are developed, the developers or the builders, the owners are asked to dedicate right-of-way so that the drainage laterals that pass through there can be maintained, taken care of. These requirements are being, the width of these right-of-ways is being increased. This is something that was requested by the gravity drainage districts through the coalition meetings. Required drainage layout and grading plans. This refers to the fact that in the engineering process, in the part of reviewing their plans, they're going to be asked to draw up specific documents on how the drainage is going to work in a development, specific documents on how they're going to grade the land, and then we will inspect to those things as they go through the construction. So this, again, is attempting to get the site built right at the beginning so that we don't have the backside trouble of after the developer is gone and we're now dealing with the individual homeowners or tract owners that might be in that site, and they're trying to now overcome a plan that makes it awful hard. So that's a significant change. No work to commence prior to approval of the plans or getting your permit. What we have today is, as people get off into the process of establishing of designing their site, they will also begin doing site work. They will begin doing some preliminary work. And it's not, what happens in that process is, if they're clearing land or leveling land or things like that, what happens is people who are downstream of them, people who are adjacent to them, begin to feel the effects of this development, and it's really long before the plans have been approved. So that's why you have you end up with an ordinance, where basically you'd like for them to get all their plans done and do it in an orderly fashion so that even during the construction phase, people who are adjacent to these sites or downstream of these sites don't necessarily see the intermediate impacts, the construction impacts. That's why you do that. Last thing is construction phase and field inspections and as-built drawings are all things that are new and different. Phasing the construction, one of the things there is we really want the detention ponds to be built first so that as they're building out the rest of the subdivisions, that the water can begin being routed through these ponds so that the flooding aspect the mitigation for flooding starts day one. Field inspections is just about trying to get a quality construction done out in the field, and as-built drawings are something that will be filed at the courthouse so that as there are things that come up later in these developments, we'll have a legal document to actually go back to and refer to in terms of trying to resolve various things that come up as you go through. And not how, if you like, I'll be glad to stop and answer a question right there.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, could I have a question? Thank you. One of the things while you were here on this one too, because we had this happen in my district, and I just never foresaw it coming, but when we have the drainage layouts and grading plans, and then no work shall commence till prior approval, engineering plans and permits, but we approved a subdivision, and then a big rain came, and a lot of that dirt ran off into one of our neighbor's yard. Do we have any kind of teeth in our ordinance that we can go back and make sure that if the approval, sometimes we don't foresee things, that we can make that contractor take care of that issue?
So, this may be a little bit splitting hairs, but you're talking about a stormwater issue, and you're really talking about a stormwater quality issue. The ordinances that we're talking about now are quantity. So we're talking about how much water runs off and things like that. So to protect adjacent landowners from runoff that's got silt and dirt in it and mud and leaving them a mess is really in your stormwater quality ordinances. These are not being addressed in this package.
Okay.
Do we have some things for that issue that you just described? Yes, sir. Do those ordinances need some updating? Yes, sir. I think the answer to that as well, because there's areas in Calcasieu. The first limitation of that set of ordinances is that it only covers a part of Calcasieu Parish. So if you're not in a specific zone, well, the very thing can happen to you, and the ordinance doesn't even cover it. So one of the things we need to look at in the future quickly is to update those ordinances.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so kind of moving or changing gears from ordinance. I know y'all have heard a lot about ordinances over the months, so we really wanted to focus our update tonight on the capital project and the planning that's going on, the things that our stormwater management team is working on and been working on. So the rest of the slides are really going to relate to that, plus some of the timeline things that are going on. So when we talk about projects that are underway, there's really 3 levels of projects that team is working on. There's watershed planning studies that they're working on. This is the 40,000 view of how the watersheds are performing and what we need to do. We're initiating studies with professional engineering services now to do what's called 2D modeling to prepare FEMA related documents to basically mimic FEMA guidelines for what we should be doing with our watersheds, to follow their standards and recommendations, so that we get a kind of a path forward that will set us up for maximizing our community rating system points and ultimately minimizing insurance rates for people who live in in all of our watersheds. So these studies will set the tone for how we want to manage at a high level the watersheds going forward for generations. The second level of projects on this list is regional watershed level projects. And when we talk about, these are projects, construction projects, that have the ability to impact a large portion of the watershed. In fact, you know, an entire region. So they're not projects that are designed and defined about trying to fix drainage on one street or in one subdivision. Although they may have that result, they're really regional in nature, and you're trying to impact the entire watershed. So right now we're working on basically 7 of those projects. These are the projects that came from the coalition meetings. We have identified them through meeting with all the gravity drainage districts and the municipalities. They've been narrowed down to this list. There's more out there, but this is sort of the first 7. Really, it's the first 6 that came from that. One that we throw into that hopper is the regional detention pond on Louisiana Avenue, which definitely fits the bill, but it kind of came from a slightly different direction. That's something that we more or less instigated in-house. These are generally focused on major laterals. So the team is moving those forward through a planning process. We're in the beginning stages of getting some modeling done on those to make sure that they're going to be productive projects, and I got a slide to show you a little bit how that works in just a second. The third level of projects is street level projects. These are the ones that you're going to get y'all get the most calls on. These are, my street floods, culvert down the way needs to be replaced. These are projects that we attempt to do with our team in-house from the engineering and the surveying. We prepare plans. We get them drawn up, and we ideally will build these projects out with Public Works crews. We have budgeted for a special drainage Public Works crew to really work on these projects. Right now, we have about 50+ of these in the queue that are working their way through one level or another, being designed and ready for being funded. Generally, these projects are all about trying to bring the roadside edge culvert system up to the parish's minimum standard. 'Cause a lot of times when you go out there, you may find that it doesn't, we have a substandard drainage system in some way. Some pipe out there is too small or needs to be replaced, or several of them. So that's the 3 levels of projects. We have really 2 kind of working paths for these projects. The regional one's the only one I'm going to show you tonight, but the in-house one works very similar. Just to kind of give you a feel for the steps we go through. Once the project is selected, we will generally acquire engineering services to do what is commonly called 2D modeling. The modeling lets us quantify the results that we expect to get, plus look at alternate projects for that particular project, maybe look at a little cheaper solution than, or find something that may work different or better. Once we have pinned it down to the type of project we want to try and build, it'll go through a cost-benefit analysis process so that, some projects, it may be great ideas, but they really don't ultimately generate the return on investment that you'd like. So we'd like to know that before generally these projects are in the millions of dollars, and we would like to know that we're confident that we're going to get some results from that type project. If we're satisfied with that, then we will move that project to a kind of a natural threshold or a milestone of 30% engineering plans, and that will allow us to basically have a solid estimate, a solid understanding of the hurdles that project's going to see if you try to construct it, how much right-of-way we need, how much wetlands we got to deal with, all those little things that kind of come at you in the midst of a project. So once we get to 30% plans and we still feel like it's a buildable project, it would go to be ultimately recommended for funding, which would be almost inevitably typically going to be a bid out type project like you do with your roads and other things all the time. So again, we have a very similar flow chart for our in-house projects. Is just generally you see our people, our staff, our crews doing the work in-house. To give you just a kind of a quick look at the project map that we have right now. Basically, the map you're looking at is, you may not have seen this one exactly before. This is the parish divided into the 10 major watersheds that we like to use from the stormwater management side. Gives us, when we're looking at managing things on a watershed basis, this is the sort of the boundaries we would have. The blue dots represent the major or regional watershed level projects, and the red dots represent the street level projects. And it's sort of obvious in where the dots are located, that where you have density and where you have people living, you're going to see a lot of projects. So again, this is the projects that have kind of gotten into the queue over the last year, one way or another, that we're working on. Many of these have engineering plans ready to go, and we're at a point on that flow chart where really it's about funding and trying to put the projects, go ahead and get them in the ground. So we got some funding slides here in just a second. So I just want to, we keep this map sort of updated and live all the time and kind of continue. So if you ever want to see this, be glad to give you an update anytime you like. So when I gave Brian this slide, I said, you might want to sit down on this one, Brian. It's kind of got some big numbers on it. To date, this is our funding needs for this program. And we don't take this lightly at all. This is some tremendously large numbers. The Watershed Planning study effort, $1 million. The regional watershed projects, now generally this is the sort of outside estimate for the total price, so it's engineering right away, all the things that you need. These numbers are going to move around as you look at other alternatives for individual projects, as you run across hurdles. As the projects get further defined, obviously the numbers will move around, but we know we're in this ballpark now. And the street level projects, which, you know, lately Mother Nature's been challenging us every other day, so we're adding these projects to the list every day, it seems like. So as you can see, we have, you know, well over $25 million in projects now in the queue. Comment I would provide is really that, you know, prevention is going to be way cheaper than the cure on all this. And you know, the more we can do on that ordinance side that avoids having to go back and try and fix problems later, over the, you know, the life of this program, we're going to spend a lot less money. And so I wanted to try and quantify to y'all that, you know, that these projects really cost a lot of money. So with that, we're going to jump back to ordinances and the timeline. This is one of the last slides, but when you get back to ordinances, we're trying to move that through a very lengthy strategic process of getting as much feedback as we can, because we know those are ordinances that are going to change the way things are being done. We understand that. We feel it's important, but just to kind of run through the timeline quickly, April, we had the stakeholder meetings at the Seed Center. We're in the feedback phase right now. Next week, we will begin going through the comments and offering changes to the ordinances that are valid. When I'm sure they're going to find some things that need to be changed, so we'll work through that. We would like to be back. Well, we're here tonight giving you the update. We'll actually try and be back to the Drainage Committee in June with the sort of draft ordinance that has gone through this process that we would recommend for adoption. If we get favorable recommendation at that point, then because this is a change to Chapter 26, we would ultimately need to go through the Planning and Zoning Board and then back to the full police jury to possibly have something passed by, you know, in the July and August range. So that really concludes the presentation, and we'll be glad to take some questions, and however, you know, if you have some, be glad to try and answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. We do have a few questions. Mr. Andrew Pond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the report, by the way, number one. Just your timeline frame, I know is short range. From a benchmark standpoint, from the day you get approval from this body and you pull the trigger, what's the long range time frame? You have a clue, some type of benchmark, how many years?
You're talking about for when the ordinances would go into place, Mr. Andrews?
When we start actual putting the shovel in the ground?
On the project.
On the project.
On the project. So we will be, we have a couple projects that are, you know, there was some budget money assigned for this year. About $2 million, I think we have in our capital budget for this year. So we may very well make it to a point this year for the top project to go out to bid if things go smoothly. But generally speaking, I would say the 2018 budget is should have a request for funding for some level of these projects to be bid in 2018 and you know, try and get the shovels in the ground in 2018.
Okay. Geographically, the projects that you discussed about, first one, where is that?
The first one,
The one you said is
the regional detention pond?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's one that sort of kind of got into the harbor. That's on Louisiana Avenue by McNeese Street. It's a project that you've authorized the purchase of the land for. It's right now would be about a 14.5 acre regional detention pond. We have some opportunities to look at a little bit of additional land there. As soon as we get through that, we are basically in a position now to let the engineers do their design on that project. We still have to work out a funding program for that. As you may recall, the purchase of the land was a three-way purchase between us, the Gravity Drainage District for that area, and the city of Lake Charles. So you still have to go and we have to develop a funding plan for that project. It's about a $5 million project. So if we should have the design, you know, in this year, in 2017, and it's going to come down to funding on that one.
I noticed, if I read it correctly, the number I saw was like 28 million. Is that the number?
If you add them all up, yes, sir, to the high number, you're in the 28 million.
It's not really significant because I'm not going to be here, but you know as well as I do, we can project 28 million today, and in 10 years from now, that number is going to change.
Yes.
So I would be very cautious in not being, I'm not going to give you advice because I can't do your job, but what I'm saying is that from a financial standpoint of view, I think that you need to be careful from overrides, unforeseen, kind of like being in business, you think, you know, and it doesn't work out that way. One more thing, and that is, keep talking about this money and budget to funding. Where is most of this money going to come from?
Brian, you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Alan, for handing me that. No, thank you, Mr. Andrew Pond. Obviously, that's a very important question. The main source to begin is your parish-wide, what we call road and drainage property tax. I believe it's 3.8 some odd mills. It raises right now. I think this year we estimate $7.5 million. Obviously, some of that historically, matter of fact, most of it has been used on the road side. But as Alan pointed out, we're shifting some, and we're going to have to shift more of the drainage side. We're able to do that because we also have road revenues from some sales taxes. So we think we can get started with a lot of that. We may need to bond some of that, not with a new tax, but existing tax, just to get some of these projects going. Beyond that revenue source, we would look in some cases, maybe at the larger drainage districts, helping out some, depends on the need. Maybe cities. Other than that, it's possible some of the sales tax could be used, but that depends on the other needs.
Well, I'm not pinning you down. I was just trying to get some
It's a good question.
benchmark to shoot from. We were talking about. What's going to be interesting is that, you know, that road and drainage fund thing where municipalities and Gravity Drainage Board and others have been drawing from that. It's been kind of like a gift, windfall for them. But I'm going to tell you, if it comes between them and this, I think this is going to have to take priority. There's no question about
Well, I
that in my
hope,
mind.
Francis, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Out of that tax, that's the one, the $1 million a year comes from that tax. I think our goal, and Alan can speak to it better, we want to align, if that's going to stay in place, and it really needs to, because that's in the tax call, but.
We've been doing it for
align-
20 years, I guess.
But the key there is it needs to align with what we're all identifying as priorities. And I think between the districts, cities, and us, we can get there. So I think we're going to be okay.
I think the one thing, Brian, and again, I'm not trying to dictate policy, but I think the one thing that's going to have to be addressed is, you know, we allocated $1 million annually, and sometimes it went over that. I think we're going to have to be a little bit more stringent, a little bit more careful to be sure that we stay within that guideline that we set with $1 million, because if we don't, with this big monumental task that we're fixing to undertake, you know, I'm just throwing that out on the table. Again, like I say, my time is limited. But anyway, that being said, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew Pont. Mr. Latour?
Yes, sir. I was just curious, on the fees that's going to come from the detention setup for smaller properties, what is the fee going to be on the actual building square foot or the acreage square foot, and how much is the fee going to be?
What was presented at the stakeholder meetings and it would be based on the impervious area created, so based on the construction square foot really of impervious area, concrete, rooftops, those things that are considered impervious. You would pay based on that, and the cost estimate or the fee estimate that we've prepared is 22 cents per square foot that was provided. That's not set. That, again, that's something that would be, that's the starting point for a fee schedule. And that would be at this point, it's a very simplified calculation that is really just the same fee for everyone. So some of the comments you get is maybe some structures pay more, some others. We didn't make anything complex at this point, just a very simple per square foot calculation.
Okay, so is there any stipulation if it's, okay, say you said something about 2 acres. Say I had a 10-acre project and I'd rather pay the fee. Could I do either or, basically?
At this point, that's the either or is not in there, and to be honest with you, we would prefer to not put that in there, because really, at the end of the day, we want the site to do its detention on site.
Correct.
The fee is to try and help overcome those sites that it's a little impractical, even uneconomical to do it on site, and you're going to be forced to try and come up with some other solutions as those sites do in fact develop. So you need some money, just as Mr. Andrew Pont was alluding to. The money challenge is going to be real, so the money from the fee would go to build and help build regional detention ponds, which is really there to help offset those smaller sites that you're going to give a pass on detention on site, but they pay a fee to try and help build out the rest of the system.
Okay.
So that it's just a fee in lieu of on-site detention, but no and/or option now.
No, and so it's going to be a revision where basically if you can put it, you have to put it.
Yes, right, and that's the best solution for all.
Yeah, I was just
Do it
curious,
on
because that's
site,
what
we
basically
believe.
happens. Somebody would look at the cost difference, and I'd rather pay the fee and get more acreage and build more development.
We've definitely had that discussion, and we understand that, and again, that we really would not, if you end up with that type of program, your fee schedule will definitely have to change significantly.
All right, thank you. You bet, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Landry?
Thank you, Mr. Beers. Yeah, that fee at 22 cents, I mean, that's not enough. I don't know where you came up with that, but I can tell you that's not enough. That's not going to scratch the surface here of what we're talking about. So I can build 10,000 square feet of impervious surface, and I'm going to pay $2,200.
Well, you sound like you're
I'd be
already-
happy to pay you that.
You're already over the 2-acre sort of threshold, so you're
you
already
got some-
got, yeah, there are some other things. I was
Okay.
keeping it simple, but there are other things that qualify whether you can even pay the fee,
All
yeah.
right, but where did that come up? I mean, that 22 cents, because that's not even close to the number that we were talking about some months ago.
Well, we had a consultant team work on this. CSRS is one of our partners in all this. They've been working with us all along the way. One of their tasks was to help develop a fee. And so actually what was done, they took the takeoff cost from the Louisiana Avenue project, which we would acknowledge is a regional detention pond. It's actually a fairly expensive one because of its location and everything. So they really took off from the numbers that were generated from that study for the cost and worked their way back to a per square foot fee. So it's based off of, and it should be based off of, real construction cost. And ideally, we would like to see it at real construction cost for regional detention, because that's where you're gonna go try and really offset this portion of development that is not gonna really get the opportunity to do their mitigation on site. They're gonna, you're gonna need to you gotta do it for them. So it's, the fee is, we have the calculation, surely interested in proofing it out and looking at it. It's never really been intended to totally fund this program. It's
Right.
just a a proportionate share of your burden that you're adding to the system. So there's no doubt we'll need additional funds to really fund a capital program of this scale year after year.
And I mean, and it should help developers, because I know often they come to us and they got a particular piece of property, and I mean, you just can't work it out. They can't do the development because they can't handle the drainage requirements that are required of them. So I mean, I would think that they would be pleased with that
I think.
part of it.
Yes, sir.
I would imagine. The other thing is about the funding. Of course, none of these projects ever go down. So I mean, I don't picture us putting this off for long periods of time. I don't know if you've gotten with Tammy and Jerry Milner and have them sit down, and if not, I would hope at the meeting we have next month, maybe they could give us a little bit more detail of the funding options. And, you know, I mean, 30 million, Jerry ought to be able to come up with that. If he can't, Tammy can. I know they can figure that out somehow, whether they bond or what have you, or gaming. I know we got a lot of things going on, but we've got to figure out a way to do it, and I think it needs to be done in a reasonable amount of time. And I think people are expecting that from us.
Well, a comment on that would be, right now we're sort of capturing all these projects, trying to put some price on them, quantify them. It was always intended to be a lot like the 3-year capital road program, where it's a reasonable chunk year after year after year. So right now this is sort of just it's going to look awful heavy here at the front. There's no way you can knock it out all in 1 year, and really, it will be a challenge. So the goal is to establish a annual program that really maybe could put $5, $6, $7 million a year to good drainage projects, whatever the number is that we can live with and afford. So, this is going to be a program that needs to go forward for generations if you're really going to try and get ahead of where we're at today. And we surely need to put our efforts into preventing more flooding. So, because you're right about one thing, these prices are not going to get any smaller.
Well, yeah, the prevention, that's the way to go. And here's the other problem, is nobody wants to pay any more than they're paying now. They want you to solve this issue, this problem, they don't want to pay anymore. That's the real challenge, is to be able to do it with the money you have, and that's not going to be easy to do, but I got faith. I know Tammy and Jerry, they'd be able to figure it out for us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Scott?
To follow up on Mr. Latour's question, I know nobody builds without permits here, so, we're able to track all that, of course. But when that happens, and you go back and can you apply the civil penalties and that go to drainage, as well as now making them take care of their drainage impact fee that they didn't take care of? Have we looked at, because that's a funding mechanism. So I think a lot of people just decide to make a driveway, without asking, or so. That's impervious surface. So do we have an idea of how that might work out? Because I know Wes needs his money. So I know he doesn't want to lose the civil penalties, not that we get a lot of it, but we might have to pay that. We might have to pay a little more close attention to who's doing what.
Yeah, well, just to be honest with you, we've spent a lot of time trying to figure a lot of things out. We haven't got that far down into the details of at that level, but I would like to think that if you ended up in a situation where someone should have paid a fee and they didn't, that at least we get the impact fee, and the civil part of it would be, Wes might be in a better position to talk about that. But I think you at least want to try and create a culture where everyone understands that when they add impervious surface to the watershed and they create additional runoff, that they need to participate in trying to mitigate that. And that's really the goal. So not to take the position that, I get to build it and someone else needs to drain it. We need to have a team effort here, that we build a little less concrete and hard surfaces, and when we do, let's try and put enough money up to mitigate it.
Mr. Gabb, can we double the impact fee if they didn't apply for a permit and they did something? Just the impact fee? Like, could that be part of the ordinance?
We can certainly review it. We can try to make,
It'll make you come in and get your permit at least. I mean, it just puts a little more teeth into you know, the actual funding end of it.
We can certainly look into the penalties provisions.
I was just curious. Did you have something to add, Mr. Crane?
Oh, no, that's fine. There is an enforcement mechanism portion that has to be associated with this.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Latour? Okay, I'm going to beat you up one more time. Just out of curiosity, would there be any stipulations, like say that I have a 10-acre tract, 2,000 foot of road frontage, where say I just want to develop 2 acres at a time to get away from your 2-acre minimum? Is there any stipulations that for one contractor, for X piece of property, like he cannot come back and try to get more development, just basically a loophole around the system, kind of?
Well, we've known for years that type of loophole has existed, either you call it minor sub to some degree, or meets and bounds type developments where you can really, if you got the right setup, you can skirt around, you know, some of the reviews of the subdivision process. So we've tried to, in this entire process, make sure that all development is subject to the runoff, the drainage requirements. And so that they would ultimately pass through, you know, a process that one way or another, they meet this ordinance where, A, we would like to see those sites do on-site development and prepare their drainage so that it's not a burden on anyone else. That would be the ultimate goal. But if not, that at least a fee get paid so that it can go into projects to help mitigate whatever they're putting on that property.
Okay. Just one other thing, just before you do everybody else's projects, think of, you know, District 10 first. I yield back.
You want to respond?
You don't yawn on
Thank you, Mr. Latour, you're out of quarter. Mr. Farnham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How much collaboration have y'all done or communication with Jeff Davis and Beauregard on this? Because, you know, they both got big, giant welcome signs up, almost as big as the Westlake sign, saying, come on and build here. We don't have near the things that you require. And they're building literally hundreds and hundreds of houses just across the border. And we have to deal with their water, too. So how much communication have y'all had with them?
Not much, I'm gonna be honest, you know, and we've had some conversations with them. We've in fact been invited up there. It's been a couple of months to go discuss our ordinances, not just drainage ordinances, but our entire, really, development code. And as some in that area have already begun to experience those growth problems that come from that style of growth. And so they were looking, but they're going to be in a tough position up there, and as those areas go to grow, I would hope that they could look at what we are facing and make some good decisions. As their water comes down on our watersheds, really, it's going to be awful hard for us to individually to somehow draw a boundary at the parish line. But what you do see in that arena, Dennis can maybe allude to this, is statewide watershed planning is beginning to take hold. It's probably still years in the coming in being here, but at the end of the day, statewide watershed planning is happening. You may see state regulation for that at some point, and that will help address adjacent communities putting water on each other even more. So that is a growing issue. It really wasn't that big of a deal, but as they grow and expand up there and more water's coming down through some of our areas, we will really have to begin honestly working together to try and mitigate that one way or another.
I think that's one of the most significant challenges, and you guys are doing a great job on getting this started. Because you got to start somewhere. When you try to eat the elephant, you got to cut it up into little pieces. So you guys are doing a great job. That's one of the most significant challenges we're going to have, is not driving the development out of Calcasieu into those neighboring parishes. Because like y'all said, water doesn't stop at ward lines, and it doesn't stop at parish lines either. So we have to be real careful not to drive the development out of the parish and still tackle the problem. So appreciate all the hard work y'all are putting into this, because it's a tough task.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Farnham. Mr. Wainwright, you know, we talk about this impervious percentage of impervious surface, whatever. What about, you know, in the outlying areas, we have the folks that, one guy every 4 or 5 houses that wants to cover 200, 300, 400 foot of his ditch. You know, yeah, it's not impervious, but you are drastically cutting the capacity down of that waterway. I mean, is any of that been taken into consideration about, you know, what kind of areas can have covered ditches? I mean, have we thought about regulating that? And if so, if we do allow them, and, you know, could we have larger culvert sizes per, you know, the longer you run? I mean, those things, because like I said, that's capacity that's gone.
Yeah, so, the parish has moved a long way in 20 years that I've worked here, because in 97, 96, 97, when I got here, you know, you literally could find a culvert, roll it in the ditch, and you could cover it up, and that's where we were then. Now today, though, there is, for that same culvert out in a rural area, you have to pull a permit. A permit agent goes out there. He ultimately, if need be, consults with an engineer on our staff, and they get it sized to your parish standards of today. So, number one, I'd say those problems are reduced in that we get that culvert size right, and we generally get it on the right grade for that ditch. That being said, you know, anytime you're piping in a ditch, you are reducing the volume, and you are reducing its capacity to not only carry water, but really store it. And our system requires a lot of storage. So there has not been any sort of thought to prohibition against piping in your ditch of any sort. So we've really only focused on sizing it right if it's going to get piped in. And then the only thing that's in the current ordinance updates is to require basically a lot more often enclosed roadside ditches when they're building new subdivisions. And really the reason for that is, especially in situations where sewer discharge is involved, that those become what I consider high maintenance miles that are getting constructed, that ultimately has your public works department out there day in and day out cleaning these ditches of sewer. So we're really, if you read into that section of the ordinance, we're trying to avoid putting sewer effluent in the ditches as a first order of business, and then otherwise piping in these ditches so that we just don't build so many miles out there where you're asking public works crews to go clean them, you know, constantly from discharge. So a lot is in there regarding that part of it.
Well, I understand it's kind of a catch-22. Well, then I guess maybe a lot of the weight should be shifted on what culvert sizes are correct. I mean, are 15 minimums, is that the de facto, or do we need to think about?
Well, we actually bumped it up. I'm sorry, I did forget that. We bumped it up to an 18-inch minimum. That is across the board type of standard. You know, and again, that is to try and provide a little extra cushion and capacity in the system. There's surely going to be places where 15 might work, but we feel like that adds that extra little bit of volume at a really a very minor increase in the cost. It's going to let that much more debris pass through it, all the little things that we fight. There'll be a few places where that size pipe may not fit in a ditch. We have waivers. So, you know, managing your drainage system is just a complex problem.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. Anyone else?
Move to receive report.
Second.
Got a motion by Mr. Angelpont, second by Mr. Landry. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none. Motion carries. Item 5, consideration of making a recommendation with reference to adopting a resolution approving expropriation of property for the Nursery Street Bridge Replacement Project. Got a motion by Mr. Angelpont and a second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? Any objections? Motion carries. Item 6, consideration of making a recommendation with reference to adopting a resolution approving an active sale agreement for the purchase of property of the Nursery Street Bridge Replacement Project. I got a motion by Mr. Andrew Pont, and a second by Mr. White. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 7, consideration of making a recommendation with reference to adopting a resolution approving an active sale agreement for the purchase of property for the Coach Williams Drive Extension Project.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McMillan, second by Mr. Farnum. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 8, consideration
Move
of
on,
making a recommendation with reference to adopting a resolution approving a drainage servitude on Tank Farm Road. Motion by Mr. Scott, second by Mr. Gilrery. Any discussions? Any objection? Motion carries. Item 9, consideration of making a recommendation with reference to adopting a resolution approving a utility and drainage servitude for the Coach Williams Drive Extension Project. Second. Motion by Mr. McMillan, second by Mr. Farnum. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 10, consideration of making a recommendation with reference to adopting a resolution approving temporary construction servitude agreements for the Terrio Road Drainage Upgrade Project. Motion by Mr. Collins, a second by Ms. Mayo. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 11, consideration of a recommendation with reference to adopting a resolution approving a lighting agreement to construct and install a roadway lighting system at the I-10 interchange of Highway 109. Got a motion by Mr. Farnum and a second by Mr. Landry. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries.
We got them at 109, but we don't have them on the bridge.
Item 12, consideration of making a recommendation with reference to adopting a resolution accepting the Leger Road Sidewalk Safe Routes to School project as complete. Got a motion by Mr. Scott, and a second by Mr. McMillan. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Item 13, consideration of making a recommendation with reference to proclaiming week of May 21 through 27, 2017 as National Public Works Week in Calcasieu Parish. I would like to call on Ms. Teresa Champeau, the Assistant Director of Public Works.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This year, National Public Works Week celebrates the vital role Public Works plays in connecting all of us together. As you can see there, the poster that the National Public Works has put together depicts that. As the cornerstone of civilization, Public Works provides, maintains, improves the various structures and services that assure a higher quality of life and work for all communities. Streets, roads, bridges, and public transportation keep us linked together from coast to coast, and clean water and sanitation services keep us healthy and allow our communities to grow and prosper. The Division of Engineering and Public Works in Calcasieu Parish appreciates the police jury's recognition and support of our local public works and engineering professionals who work tirelessly every day to continuously provide the highest level of service possible to the community in all of our efforts. Your public works employees spend time out in the worst weather conditions, often at night when most people are secure in their homes, to ensure that the community has safe roads and bridges to travel when the new day arrives. It was very eye-opening to me to learn just how often this occurs and how much is actually done in the midst of storms or shortly after that the public never knows about. All they know is they get up and continue about their normal route to work in the morning with no problems, never knowing the efforts that were put forth during the wee hours of the morning to make that happen. I know that I truly appreciate your acknowledgement of this week for our people, and I know that they will appreciate it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Champeau. We've got a few questions, maybe comments. Mr. McMillan?
I would just like to say, I think we have the best public works department of any parish in our state. And with that being said, I would like to give you a standing ovation. Thank you very much for what you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. I would say that standing ovation is much more deserved by the crews that are out there doing the actual work.
Absolutely, that's what I meant, for them.
Just want to make sure that's clear to anybody watching, because I'm not doing any of that.
Mr. White?
I want to kind of echo what Hal said. It is the first phone call I make, to be honest with you. It's, Public Works is the absolute, it's on speed dial on my phone. Every supervision or supervisor in the field to field employees, they're the first people I call for anything. And I appreciate that what everyone does within that staff. They make my life a lot happier. They definitely truly are deserving of this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You're
Mr.
back.
White. Yeah, I love my A-team. That's what I call my guys. And, you know, well, the good thing is there's some of them coming up, you know, but I look at some of them and they talk about retirement sometimes. I'm like, don't do that to me. But anyway, y'all are very lucky. Y'all got a huge group of talented people, and thank you for everything y'all do.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Item number 14, Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to welcome back Dr. Mackey. For those of you that don't know, he's probably our longest-serving police jury. He was here for 28 years, so there won't be much of a learning curve. He knows what's going on, I can assure you. And we're glad to have you back, Doc.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
Second.
Move. So move.
Second.
Motion? We're now adjourned.
All right, get it.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of dollars.
Like mine. Hey, let's,
Happy to see that, but it-
you don't use hers anyway.
I don't know where Hal is.
Sandy, you there?
No, it's already signed up.
I don't know what the hell.
You got a lot of,
Now it changed it. Remember, it used to be the little tabs up there, they changed it. Go away, pull it.
There you go.
Thank you, buddy.
All good? Call to order the Agenda Committee for Thursday, May 25th, 2017. The purpose of today's committee meeting is to formulate an agenda for the regular meeting of the police jury on June 1st, 2017. Need a motion and a second to pull item 21.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pull 21.
Man, you gotta be smarter than equipment. You're working
21.
pretty smart.
21.
Take appropriate action on the terms of the following members of various boards and districts. Item A, Mr. Lawrence Huffpower, Ward 2, Fire Protection District Number 1.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to defer for 30 days. Any objection? Motion carries. Item B, Ms. Helen Duhan, Waterworks District Number 8 of Wards 3 and 8.
To move to reappoint Ms. Helen Duhan.
Second.
Motion and a second to reappoint Ms. Duhan. Any objection to that one?
yeah, another 30 days.
Hearing none, that motion carries. Item C, Mr. Bobby Letard, Recreation District Number 1 of Ward 4.
Move to reappoint.
Motion by Mr. McMillan, second by Mr. Landry. Any objection to that?
21.
Hearing none, motion carries. Item D,
Move to reappoint
Mr.
Mr.
James
Gary
Gary
Gobert.
Gobert, Chenault International Airport Authority. Motion by Mr. Scott, second by President Guidry.
Says it's all three of them.
Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item E, Workforce Development Board. Guess we got to take these one at a time.
What is the first one? It doesn't really
We have state-required nominating public agencies. Ms. Tamika Simeon,
I'd like to move to reappoint, or appoint, I guess you'd say.
she's currently, this is a reappointment.
Reappoint, move to reappoint Ms. Tamika Simeon.
Second?
We have a motion by Mr. Latour to reappoint, second by Ms. Mayo.
We've got a point of clarification here on this one.
The names without appoint or reappoint notes means no nominations have been received on them yet, so they will remain on the agenda or be deferred.
Will we defer?
Yeah, what she means, Mr. Chairman, is the way the workforce
Okay, so
laws are set up, you
anything
have
that
to
doesn't
get
have a
other
rec-
agencies, you have to get
if it
nominated.
doesn't have a recommendation, we need to wait and defer that item.
Correct.
Okay. So there's only a few that don't
I'd
have
like to
anything
move to
by them.
defer Ms. Tamika Simeon for 30 days.
Second.
So 30 days is appropriate, or we're waiting on nominations, so it'll come back at next month's committee meeting?
That's the plan.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to defer for 30 days.
Dalton still want to be on
Any objection?
Yeah.
That motion carries. Second one is Mr. Robert Fontenot.
reappoint Mr. Robert Fontenot.
We have a motion by Ms. Mayo, second by Mr. Guidry, or President Guidry, to reappoint. Any discussion? Objection? Hearing none, that motion carries. The next group is Private Sector Nominating Agency, Southwest Louisiana Economic Development Alliance. Ms. Hope Leadham Prather.
Move to reappoint Ms. Hope Little Prather.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Mayo, second by Mr. Latour to reappoint. Any discussion? Objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Ms. Barbara Desnook? Is that right?
Move to reappoint.
Second. We have a motion by Mr. Landry to reappoint, second by President Guidry. Almost messed up again there, Prez.
I'm gonna keep seconding and motioning things, 'cause I like the way it sounds.
Any discussion on this item? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Mr. Darrell Hennigan.
To defer for 30 days.
Motion by Ms. Mayo to defer for 30 days, second by Mr. Scott. Any objection to that one? Hearing none, motion carries. Mr. Richard
Move to
Honig.
appoint Mr. Larry Duracell.
We have a motion by Mr. McMillan to appoint Mr. Larry Daracell, second by Mr. Landry. Any discussion on this item? Objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Mr. Nicole Moncrief.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Guillory to reappoint, second by Mr. Landry. Any objection to this? Hearing none, motion carries. Next group, Private Sector Nominating Agencies, Vernon Parish Chamber of Commerce.
Move to reappoint Mr. Alfred.
Mr. Rand Alford, motion by Mr. Landry to reappoint, second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? Objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Ms. Deborah Jones,
Move to reappoint.
Second.
Mr. Jones.
motion by Mr. White to reappoint Ms. Jones, second by Mr. Landry. Discussion?
That's good.
Objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Next group, Private Sector Nominating Agencies,
Move to defer for
Jeff
30
Davis,
days.
Second.
Toby Lake.
Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Toby Leger,
Move to defer.
move to defer for 30 days by
Mr. White.
Mr. White. Second by Mr. McMillan. Any discussion on this item? Objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Mr. Kyle Clausen.
Move to appoint Mr. Ruth Cornice.
Mrs.
Motion by Mr. Latour to appoint Ms. Ruth Carnes. Second by Ms. Mayo. Discussion on this item. Objection? Hearing none, motion carries.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adjourn, we're done.
Very good.